My name is Andrew Gough. I'm really excited to share with you what I call Race for the Relics of the Inner Earth, the forgotten legacy of the Nephilim. And if you've ever gone to like a speed dating event, then this is going to be the speed dating equivalent for the hollow earth. So I can only apologize if I talk quickly. So the earth is over 4.5 billion years old. I mean, how arrogant and foolish of us is it to think that we are and have only ever been its civilized inhabitants? I mean, it's just ridiculous to think that, right? The evidence of ancient epochs are incredible. And what are we talking about for the next 20 minutes? We're talking about the Nephilim, and we're talking about the hollow earth. If we look in Genesis, it says the Nephilim were in the earth in those days, not on the earth, in the earth, a detail that's often overlooked. So what evidence do we have for ancient occupation on Earth? I mean, let's start in Mexico with traces of extraterrestrials, 3,000 objects found by a farmer, validated by my colleague and good friend, Klaus Dana, clearly showing what appears to be extraterrestrial contact and craft from a very long time ago. Then we have Javier Cabrera, who has black stones, wait for it, with humans coexisting with dinosaurs, suggesting that the human race is 400 million years old. How can that be? We've all seen these images of giants, the Nephilim, right? We all understand who they are. The Bible has told us about them. There's many accounts like Heather just took you through. However, we've all seen these photoshopped images which invalidate to a large extent the fact that, well, they can't be real, can they? Someone's just played around with Photoshop. And so the baby's been thrown out with the bathwater, but I'm here to tell you that they are real and with us today. But let's look at the evidence that they existed in ancient times. Here we have megaliths in Russia. Incredible. We have Lebanon, Baalbek. Just look at this. Who built this? The unfinished obelisk in Aswan. In Peru, in Turkey and Cappadocia, these underground cities that go to like 100 levels. We're allowed to go to the first 15 or so. Why can't we go further? Who built them? When and why? Were the Nephilim involved? If we look at some of the legends of the inner earth, I'll start with the green people and a legend here in England. I'm speaking to you today from London, and this is about St. Martin's Land, which is near Cambridge, and a fantastic account in the 12th century of two kids, a brother and a sister, who were green. Their skin was green. They just appeared out of nowhere. They couldn't speak English. They didn't eat human food. The boy dies of malnutrition. The girl survives. And she learns English. And she's interviewed by the sort of blogger of the day, William of Newburgh. And his account says that when he spoke to her, she said, the sun doesn't really shine in our country beneath the earth. That's where we came from. We call it St. Martin's Land. It's sort of like the dusk and twilight in our land. And she went on to say that over beyond a great river, there's another civilization that has a luminous sort of sun. So, she describes the fact that she's come from the inner earth and she's green, right? So it gets me thinking, who else is green skinned? Well, Osiris is green skinned, right? We always think of fertility, but what if it's something else? What if he's green skinned because he comes from the inner earth where there is the same kind of sun that we have? And what's his title? Of course, he's the god of the, wait for it, underworld. The Green Knight, a magical figure. Why was he called the Green Knight? His skin was green. What color was the devil? The devil was green. The Green Man, who we're going to celebrate here really soon on May Day, we think of fertility. The whole world has images of the Green Man, but what if it's not a fertility symbol? What if it's a symbol of the fact that he's come from the inner earth? We look at Greenland, and we know that the Vikings settled here and thrived for hundreds of years until they didn't. In 1450, they virtually disappeared. The Eskimo tradition says they traveled north and descended into the inner earth. Perhaps the best example, perhaps the best legend, best known legend of the inner earth is Aragatha. And we've all read Jules Verne, who, by the way, was an incredible initiate. So Journey to the Center of the Earth, scientists, they go down these volcanoes, they go into the Middle Earth. And they find a mammoth, an unusual feature for Jules Verne to call out. And we'll come back to that a little later. Remember, mammoth. We have other famous writers of their tradition of the inner earth. Edward Bulwer Lytton, who coined "the pen is mightier than the sword," wrote that Coming Race, a very influential book about two miners who notice there's a luminous light in the floor of their mind, and they create this sort of device to allow them to descend down and investigate it. It breaks, they fall into this world, the lost civilization of Anna, who descended many thousands of years before Noah. And this idea that they found this idyllic Aryan race was an inspiration to Hitler for Mein Kampf. He also talks about viril. So we're first introduced to this notion of this energy, which can be used for warfare or for healing. But perhaps the most influential and most detailed and most important author and book on the inner earth, I feel, is The Kingdom of Aragatha, which was written by Alexander St. Ives, and a whistleblower, an initiate from the inner earth, who tells him all about it. And what he says, the initiate does, is that when spirituality is what it was promised to be in the time of Moses and God, and when the government is sorted out, in other words, I feel personally, when the evil satanic elite who have kept humankind slaves for thousands of years are eliminated, and I do think the head of that snake has been cut off, and this is happening as we speak, then the wisdom of the ages that's being protected in the inner earth will be presented to us. So he writes the book and then panics because, maybe I've revealed too much. Maybe I'm in trouble. So he goes and gets back every copy that he sold, except for one that Jared Vincent found at his publisher. He republishes it, and the world learns about the inner earth. Vincent goes on to found the Martinist order and becomes the founder of really modern day occult. A Polish scientist kind of builds upon this. He also has a whistleblower, sort of initiate, who tells him about the inner earth, who says in 1922, there'll be 50 years of strife and misery. In 1890, he says this, there'll be 50 years of strife and misery. And sure enough, there were 2 world wars, 71 years of happiness, 18 years of war. That's now. And if you don't think there's war going on now, there is. You may not see it. It's not covered in the news like we're used to. But in 2029, the people of the inner earth are going to come back because they're going to need to. Now, there's something about 2029, 2030 is very prophetic, and a lot of people are talking about it. We'll come back to that a little later as well. Another great example is the Smoky God, where there's 2 Nordic sailors, there's a big storm, their boat gets taken off course, they find themselves in this sort of crevice, and all of a sudden, guess what? There's giants. They're 12 feet tall. They live up to the age of 800 years old. Their capital is called the Garden of Eden, and there's all kinds of fast-moving craft, and really, it's a mystical place. The son and the father attempt to return. They try to escape. The father dies. The son lives, tells everyone, as you would, about what happened, and they think he's nuts. They put him in an insane asylum for the next 20 years of his life. There are legends of the hollow earth and the people, the Nephilim, the other races who live there on every single part of the globe. Every culture has a tradition of the hollow earth. And perhaps there's none more famous than Shangri-La. And in 1985, the Dalai Lama, who claims to be the terrestrial representative of the quote unquote leader of the world in Shangri-La, said an amazing thing. He said, Shangri-La is a real physical place in the human realm, but if you don't have the right karmic connection, you can't go there. You can try, they're not going to let you. So if your ancestors are from there, then you could probably find your way there. Someone who did find their way there is Admiral Richard Byrd, perhaps the most medaled American military person in history. And we're going to talk a little bit about his 46-47 Arctic expedition, which is called Operation High Jump. I mean, just look at this guy. Does he look like somebody who would make up these crazy stories? No, he doesn't. He looks like he's very, very credible indeed. But he keeps a diary because he has an inkling as to what he's going to find on this expedition. So he keeps a private diary. 3 hours into his flight, all the equipment starts to malfunction. And he thinks that's, unusual, and he's worried about it. 4 hours into the flight, there's a green valley below. How can there be a green valley below when you're in the North Pole, when you're in the Arctic? Then he sees a mammoth. How weird that he sees a mammoth. Jules Verne saw a mammoth. What's going on? Then he sees ships with swastikas on them. So we ask ourselves now, did he see ships that were German Nazi ships with swastikas on them? Do we know the Nazis claimed to have found the inner earth? Or because we know the swastika is an ancient sacred symbol, we know it appears in the Indus Valley temples alongside other really modern looking planes and war machines and tanks and that sort of thing, right? You've all seen those. So did he see a really ancient flying machine, or did he see a Nazi flying machine? Whatever he saw, it helped guide his plane to the ground. He saw this incredible city, crystal-like city, rose-colored, and he met with the master of the domain called the Aranini. And the master said, we sent some devices out in 1945 and you fired upon them. So that's the Second World War. Were these the famous Foo Fighters? But what he said that I really want to emphasize is that we see at a great distance a new world stirring from the ruins of yours, seeking its lost and legendary treasures. That's what I'm seeking. That's what Klaus Dana is seeking. So all the civilizations that have come before us have known that there's a time when we're going to need the history of arts and sciences and spirituality to be made available to us. And that is what he is saying to Bird. And when that time arrives, we shall come forward to help revive your culture and your race. So Bird, as you might expect, is pretty worked up about this. And he has an interview with a Chilean magazine, and the government says, you can't talk about this stuff. That's it, no more. And on his very last expedition, the last entry in his diary is, I have seen the land beyond the pole, the center of the great unknown. So Bird has traveled to the inner earth, clearly. And have the Nazis? They say they have, right? And they even have instructions for U-boats as to how to get there, depths, where to turn, where to go, really detailed stuff. So that sounds fantastic, right? Lots of legends, authors, so-called initiates and whistleblowers from the inner earth. But what do scientists actually have to say about the concept of civilizations existing right now as we speak inside the earth? Well, let's start with Halley. He's pretty credible. They named a comet after him, right? So he's talking about the fact that there's multiple regions within the Earth, each having its own atmosphere, being luminous, and wait for it, possibly inhabited. And at the poles, the gas that's escaping is causing the aurora borealis. Well, let's look at that. There's the pole, there's the aurora borealis, just like Halley is saying. Who else? How about Euler? Euler takes the theory a little bit further and talks about an element of an inner sun. Now, we've heard that before from the Green Children of Woolput. But now Gauss takes it even further and says the hollow earth is accessible at the poles. Symes takes that even further, and look at his images, his drawings, because when we look at the NASA photos of the North and South Pole, you're in a retreat. They look just like this. So they launch an expedition based upon his research. And just like Bird found, and just like others who claim to have been to the inner earth, you don't just, boom, turn a corner and you're there. All of a sudden, the sky inverts, the stars aren't the same. You remember Bird saw a green valley, then he saw a mammoth. So things change very, very slowly. And they claim to have met with the inhabitants of the inner earth called the Simonians. Reed Teed takes it even further, and I wish we had time to elaborate on this. He says, guess what, folks? We're not on the outside of the planet. We're in the inner earth. Very interesting concept. Let's look at what the science tells us. NASA, 1967, image of the North Pole. Come on, are you kidding me? It's wide open. Well, how come we don't see those anymore? Well, they're redacted with this sort of white foggy stuff. You can see the redaction on the top images. The bottom image is unredacted. Okay, so that's NASA. Maybe they were just having a laugh. How about Europe? What does Europe have to show? Well, ESA shows a gaping hole in the pole. Okay, well, maybe they're making it up as well. How about Russia, for instance? Boom, there you go. An open pole with light emanating from it, just like Haley suggested. Well, maybe that's all a lie. How about the other planets? Look at Saturn. What the heck is that on the North Pole of Saturn? Are you kidding me? It's a hexagon. Is that redaction? Or what is it about the poles that are so special? Are they open like the scientists and the legends suggest? Is this where the Nephilim have gone? Nephilim who, according to Genesis, were in the earth in those days? Brian Cox, the British professor, says, you don't see life on other planets. It's probably because it's beneath the planet. Maybe he's right. I did a show, What on Earth? We looked at the Russian borehole. It goes down 8 miles into the ground. For Discovery Channel, they found that there's fossils down there. Fossils 8 miles in the ground and more water beneath the surface of the Earth than on the surface. Absolutely incredible. So Project Restoration, unearthing these treasures, is what Klaus, Donna, and I are focusing on. Project Restoration. Now, we're going to go back to Alexander St. Ives because he tells us what we really need to know about what's been buried and why. The reader should picture in his mind a colossal chessboard all across the earth with chambers. All the splendors of humanity have been saved in these chambers. For many centuries, they've kind of tried to write the arts and sciences in a common language that can be understood in the future. And again, they contain all the arts and sciences for the past 50 to 60,000 years. But the really ancient stuff is below the surface, below the oceans, according to the initiate. And again, when Europe gets its act together spiritually and from a government perspective, and when we break free of this Sidonic elite rule, then it will be safe to give us this information that will relaunch our civilization with free energy and all that kind of stuff, for instance, Tesla was talking about. But woe to the curious who tries to find it before that time. You may succeed in getting into these chambers, but if you go into the chambers of the Nephilim, no one's going to hear you scream. You're not going to know what you're looking at. You're not going to understand it, and you're never going to come out. Project Restoration is about revealing the treasures of antiquity for the benefit of humanity now. And this is really Klaus Donna. I'm just lucky enough to be working for him. So about our technique, it's a bit of old school. It's a bit of new school. When I say technique in finding these chambers, because that's what we're doing. It's 100% proprietary, so please don't ask. How did the Knights Templars know where to bury their treasure? It's the 12th century. Times are hard. You've been all over the world. You have all these relics. Build a castle. Have a good life. Take it easy. No, you bury it, but you bury it in a spot where there's already other things buried deeper. Celtic appears to be about 22 meters, or at least that era. There's repeatable chambers found across the earth at 36 meters. We don't know who has put them there or what's there. And at 67 meters is the most repeatable level of chambers all across the world. A colleague asked me, are you sure that couldn't be 66.6 meters? I said, no, that's ridiculous. Don't even suggest that, but we'll look at it. It is 66.6 meters, and they've been put there by the Greys. So how do they all know where each other has buried the history of arts and sciences for mankind? We did a 2-hour special for the Discovery Channel on Forbidden History, episode 1. I go and visit Klaus in the Philippines, where he is using this technique to find the lost chambers of Yamashita's gold, 200 meters down. Project Restoration, concluding thoughts. Is there a time machine, or is history predetermined? Whistleblower, priest from the Vatican say there is a time machine. Well, we have a book written 4 decades ago that called out coronavirus in Wuhan. Come on, how can that be? And it will return in 10 years. 10 years is when the people of the inner earth, the Nephilim, are said to return. Can the Simpsons predict the future? It would appear so, right? It's almost comical. But my last slide is less comical. The Mummy with Tom Cruise features London And the discovery of a Knights Templar tomb, so important that it changes history, but it's discovered because the Crosstown Rail project has been delayed. The Crosstown Rail project is a real project in England. And guess what? It's delayed. My Illuminati contact has told me that before the film came out. It's delayed because they're looking for these chambers and some very, very important things that are necessary for humankind today. Let's hope we find them soon. Thank you for your patience as I spoke awfully quickly.